I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the wonderful movie Strange Darling. And I am joined today by actor Willa Fitzgerald, along with cinematographer Giovanni Ribisi. And Willa, in starting with you, one of the things that I love about your character and just this story as a whole is how much is able to be left open to interpretation for the audience. And it sounded like when you first read the script that that was one of the things that really drew you in as well. But I was also curious if, in the journey of developing this character and playing her, you had that same experience in how you approached her, because there's a lot of parameters and details within the script of who she is. But again, there's also a lot of space for you to be able to interpret who she is and how you portray her.
Yeah. I think obviously I kind of developed over the course of my prep process, my particular decisions and my particular read of the character and all of the pieces that I kind of solidified to make the lady that you see on screen. But I think that a really kind of exciting part of this project was the fact that I had so much specificity in what was happening to the lady in the script and in the arc of the story, um, and not really any specificity about what had ever happened to her before, and so because it was so specific what was happening to her beat to beat, scene to scene, it was really interesting to kind of like reverse engineer a history that would be helpful for me in playing her throughout the movie. And I never really had that sort of kind of openness with backstory before, and it was a really interesting and very rewarding process to just sort of see the puzzle pieces as they were, and then and fill in everything from there that kind of supported the story that I knew we were telling.
And Giovanni, coming over to you and talking about the cinematography, I wanted to ask you about the pre-production process in working with JT Molnar, who's the director of the film, and really spending this 5-month period creating what I heard was an 88-page document that was a line-by-line list of not just the shots, but is it going to be a dolly shot? Is it going to be shot on sticks? What's the lens that we're going to use? What's the
Mhm.
exposure that we're thinking of? And how that really helped you to solidify a plan so that you could either stick to it or make completely different choices once you were on set.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things about shooting on film and it's just a necessity to plan things out. I think that we're in such a different framework with making movies and visual content nowadays with the streamers, where it seems like people are more or less buying it by the yard, and you get into this mentality, this approach where you kind of show up, and it's as they say in film crews nowadays, it's run and gun. But we wanted to specifically, I mean, I guess that would be one of the first decisions that w was sort of iconoclast, especially from JT, was to just dig in and more or less make the movie one or even two times on paper before we actually did. And then, of course, you show up and everything's different, or some piece of equipment doesn't show up, or it starts raining and you weren't planning on that. But having that document really helped us, just put our best foot forward, as it were, and approach problems with more confident solutions.
Mhm.
I love that in terms of the details. And Willa, in terms of playing the lady as well, I've heard you say that you felt like there was a lot of sincerity to her. And I feel like that really comes across in watching her, is the things that she does express out loud are absolutely true. You know, when she talks about having these feelings for the demon, you can see that those feelings are there, and you can see that connectivity and the heartbreak of not being able to achieve it in amongst everything external that's happening and everything that's going on between the two of them. And so how did you make sure that when you were going into every scene that you were really looking at the emotional underlying aspects and pulling off that sincerity and communicating it?
I mean, I think that was just a real integral part of the whole process for me. It was in my first conversation that I ever had with JT. I think one of the biggest things that was important for me to communicate was kind of this love I had for the lady and this empathy I had for her, and clearly what it was a very hard life she had had that led her to this place she currently was. And while the twist is really exciting, I also really felt that it was going to work best if it came naturally from the events and not from some sort of like attempt to trick anyone. And JT obviously was fully in agreement with all of those things, and so I think that was really how we first connected on the project. And I think that the way of accessing that came from viewing this script like you would view any script, like you would view any sort of like living room drama. I looked at what the actual events were. I put them in order. The script was obviously out of order, like the movie. Put all of those events in order and really just made sure I understood where she was coming from, where she was going, how she was getting there, and what the emotional impact of that was. And then, you know, it obviously helps when you have a scene partner like Kyle, who's amazing to work with and just makes all of those other character moments that much more surprising and fantastic to get to find on set together.
And I love that sequence between the two of you when you're sitting in the car before going into the motel room,
Yeah.
where there's that entire conversation where she talks about, as a woman, I have to ask these questions and to kind of go through these checks and balances to make sure that I feel safe. And, you know, even with everything that comes later in the movie, that is a very true statement for her to be saying. And there's this real power balance at play between the two of them. And there's different moments where different people have the power. She's able to verbally set up the rules of engagement, but then when she's tied to the bed, he actually has all the power and the control. And
Yeah.
so for you, what was that constant power to and fro that you really found with Kyle?
I mean, I think that for the lady in general, I think that what her kind of deepest need is a need for connection. And it's continually and over and over again in the story that we see um, being thwarted in some way. And, you know, we kind of come to realize that she's seeing something that isn't there, which is like severing that connection that she feels that she has with these people around her. And I think that when your character has that big of a need, because clearly that's a huge need for her, the stakes are just high in every scene. It kind of gives you the engine that you need to create that sort of like instability of, do I trust what this other person is saying to me? Can I trust what they're saying to me? How do I achieve this thing that I want from them? And so it becomes a really like kinetic exchange.
And Giovanni, in the way that you filmed that whole sequence in the car, um, I feel like there's so much coverage for such a limited space that we don't usually see. And there was a point where you were hoping to be able to have shots where essentially you have half of the car, so you kind of have like the windows taken off and the back
Yeah.
half, so you could move around. But because of budget constraints, that wasn't possible. So
I
how did
love
you
how
set
much
about?
homework you did. I'm grateful for that, actually. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we were gonna chop the truck in half, and then we had this whole, you have the shot list that you had mentioned before, where we JT and I, well, first of all, it was sort of based on the whole movie wanting to feel like a fairy tale or like a fever dream. And so for the two characters, as they start connecting throughout this um, non-chronological plot, we wanted to start them out sort of in a black hole surrounded by, blue, or, focused with blue. And so that was the idea, and taking sort of wider and tighter lenses, but you can't, you got to get a camera in there and all of that. But yeah, I love that scene. I think that I speak for JT and myself. That's probably one of our favorite scenes. And I think we got in trouble for it too, because I think it's like an 8.5 minute scene that's just all blue. And two people sitting in a truck together talking. But what's so great about it, and this is like one of the reasons why I love that scene, is that because I kind of think of movies, or at least an approach, almost as like a social gathering, right? Where you're inviting people into a world, and there's other characters there that, regardless of what the lady has done, or what the demon has done, or who they are, I still want to hang out with those people. And this is at the beginning of the film, or the first half, I should say, that really kind of invites us in and makes me, after, the structure is as being sort of like a, the classic monster horror movie. You set up the monster in the beginning of the film, and you show the danger of the world that these people are existing in, and then you go, okay, question mark, who are these people? And it was just like, it set the movie up. Not to demean it by saying that, because we're setting a movie up and this is how you structure stuff, but it really it's so fundamental to this thing working, and they did it I mean, I don't remember once, just as a stupid practical thing, once these guys messing up on their dialogue or ever having a false beat, really. I mean, every time it was just like so professional against some of the most strenuous working conditions I think I've seen, especially for a director.
Mm. Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes too, actually. I mean, I love all of the scenes, but that I remember when we shot that, we were like kind of in the latter tail end of the shoot, and
Mhm.
Kyle and I were just so happy and excited to like just get to have a scene where we chatted.
Yeah.
And JT, I remember JT talking to us the day before, and he was like, "So are you guys ready? Like, do you want to rehearse anything or run anything?" And Kyle and I were like, "We got it. This is
Yeah.
like the easiest part of this movie, and we are so excited to like
You
sit
still
over."
have your ear, you still have like, yeah, there's none of
Exactly.
that yeah,
I was like,
exactly.
this is just fun.
Yeah.
I mean, because Willa, there's so many physical aspects to it, and particularly in the whole sequence of events once she's been shot, once she has her ear missing, there's also just this physical exertion and physical exhaustion which starts to seep in from the injuries, but also the physical running and kind of transporting herself to different places. And it's so interesting too because like losing an ear is such a specific thing because then she's not hearing properly. Ears are also connected to balance, and we see you kind of like stumbling around a lot more. And so when you were tracking out her whole arc, how did you track out the physicality of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a touchstone for me the whole time. I got really lucky in this project in the sense that there's so many discrete literal chapters, and within those chapters, very discrete wardrobe changes, hair changes, body physical, injury changes, and all of those things were incredibly helpful when shooting anything out of order, but especially this kind of story out of order. And I mean, I tracked it like it was my homework. It was in a lot of ways one of the easiest things to track because it's just either your ears blown off or your ears not blown off. You've either been running for hours in the woods or you haven't been running for hours in the woods, like you've either had your shoulder shot off or you haven't, like those things like accumulate in a way. And then there's like, how long has your ear been blown off for? What does it feel like at hour 2 as opposed to minute 1? Like all of those things, were just really fun layers to play with, to know, both like in my physical body and just like mentally remind myself of as I was going into shooting scenes. And I think is largely, was a huge part of finding the lady's physicality, which, just as a person in the world is very specific. And yeah, all of that was just like a delight to get to find.
I love that. And Giovanni, one of the things that's so striking with the cinematography as well is just this saturation of colors, especially when you're outdoors in nature and the way that the light's coming through. And that sequence where Will is running through the woods and then behind the tree. I heard that you went and visited that location multiple times to look at not
Oh, yeah.
just the space, but what the light was doing at different times of day. And it's such a gorgeous shot. So
Oh,
how did that time kind of spent on location really help in landing that final version of it for you?
yeah, I think it's really important to do that. I mean, just to have your own sort of moments and alone time, I guess. Not to make myself sound like a child who's being reprimanded, but like, yeah, I going out and exploring and understanding an environment so that you can study it and know what happens with light at any given moment during the day, and then you can chart with the first AD how to figure that out. But I think that's also another thing about shooting on film, is that it does have that threshold, that wider threshold for being able to manipulate colors and really bring them out. This is something that I don't usually see in a digital format where things, if you turn it up, it can sometimes fall apart a little easier. And so that was, that's one of the many advantages. But yeah, I think it was just about timing and again planning and planning and planning and planning, because no matter what, again, no matter what you plan, it's always going to change, but you're going to be able to come up with solutions that make sense and roll with the punches.
Definitely. And Willa, I wanted to ask you in particular about the icebox sequence once your character's been chained up and kind of stepping into spoiler territory, because at this point, she's been fully revealed. You know, he knows exactly who she is at that point. But again, there's still that earnestness and the connection of, you know, I really did develop feelings for you. This could have been something, but you ruined it with the way that you
Mhm.
responded to things. And I heard that that was one of the first scenes that you actually filmed. You were shooting the stuff at the hippie house and then went straight into that. And how did the act of choosing to not rehearse it, but just to read through it, really help in finding the raw emotion and the vulnerability when it came to shooting that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I come from a theater background, so I think usually I'm always down to kind of rehearse everything ad nauseum. I don't really I love to run lines, I love to rehearse, but I don't know. I think Kyle and I both just had a very intense kind of rejection of a rehearsal for that scene, and I think because I think it had something to do with the fact that there was real vulnerable truth being told in that scene for the lady, and it felt like one of those things that I didn't want to lose the first times of that truth not on camera. And because sometimes there is a magic in the newness of something, and I felt like there might be. And JT was lovely and let us not rehearse it, and that's, you know, that's just a great display of trust on his part. But yeah, and I think also doing that scene first was one of those really lucky experiences because it went so well, and because I think we all left that day feeling just like we had this sort of like foundation that we had laid. It felt like for me that there was this total keystone for the whole character and the whole movie. It gave me a real permission to just kind of go wild in all of the scenes before and after that we had yet to shoot. And
Mm.
that was just a very cool way to start that character.
Mhm.
I love that. And also in terms of spoilers in that part of the movie as well. I wanted to ask about the moment where that survival instinct kicks in and she ends up biting him. So like there's something so just animalistic about the way that she goes for him and trying to survive. But I love the detail of the fact that immediately after you're just standing there and it kind of feels like this processing after the matter because it wasn't something that was pre-planned.
Yeah.
And so how did you set about going into that particular moment of the film?
Yeah. I did do a lot of watching videos on YouTube of animals for the lady, and raccoons were a particular animal of interest for me. And I think that just came from the fact there was a lot of videos of raccoons interacting with humans when they don't want to be interacting with humans and responding in weird ways in response to, you know, human presence. And and I think, you know, I think especially in those survival moments, the lady is an animal, and it is that sort of survival drive to, you know, persevere at any cost that takes over. And I think when you are in those sort of adrenalized situations, there is a reckoning that happens after them where the fog clears and you're like, what, wow, what just, what was the thing that just transpired? Yeah, and that is what that moment is. But what's funny about it is like that wasn't necessarily a planned out thing. It was just it came from that idea of this sort of like animalistic you know, need to get out of there.
One of the details with the icebox sequence and conversation as well that I wanted to ask you both about was on paper that scene was really only 2 or 3 pages, but in actuality it was much more in depth and much longer. And because it hadn't been rehearsed, I heard that it was once you were on set that you found out that the film didn't last long enough to get through the whole scene. So how did you set about finding everything that you needed to in terms of the layers of that scene, but also finding when was the moment to break and be able to switch out the film?
Yeah. Well, I
That's
think
one
we
of the, oh,
didn't.
sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you go, you go.
No, that was just one of those things where someone in production just made a mistake, and so it was like what did you just we don't have the what, you know. And so you show up to set and you are trying to figure out, like, you know, a way to sort of like come under the radar with something like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, you know, it's interesting when you have something like that, such an important scene, and then there's an obstacle presented like that, and somehow people climb up over that and are better than they ever were. I mean, I don't know. I almost am glad it happened because there's nothing about those days that I would change. If everything aligned to get to that point with Willa's performance and Kyle, it was I mean, yeah, it was just amazing for me, you know, watching it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was one of those things where you know, obviously we were all kind of like, what are we gonna have to do? Because we would, you know, once we realized we
Roll
didn't
out.
have a long enough mag, we were like, okay, well, I guess we're gonna shoot the first half of the scene, then we're gonna pause, they're gonna reload, we're gonna start at the beginning, we'll take it through again, they'll pick
Yeah.
back up, we'll shoot the rest. And I think that, you know, I think that it is one of those things where as long as everybody kind of like keeps their cool and stays in it, I think that those are kind of the magic moments where it's like no one knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Everybody stuck with it, and I'm sure that there's something that came from that got us to where we ended up.
I also wanted to ask you both about filming that opening sequence of Willa just running slowly towards the camera in the
Mhm.
opening, because it's such a great shot and it's such a great example of how when you go back and watch the film the second time, you see so many things in a completely different perspective and you
Yeah.
realize that everything was there all along. Nothing was hiding. Everything has been in plain sight. And so how did you set about both going into that with the intent and the understanding of what that would be for the audience?
Mm.
I mean, gosh, it's interesting because we were just doing hyper slow motion or as slow motion as we could get it, and tracking obviously where that character is in the story. Um, and you know, there were technical issues. It's very difficult because you have basically like 6 inches of depth of field, they call it, for focus, and you're tracking somebody running 100 yards or whatever it was. And I think, Willa, you're a triathlete, right? Because I
No, no, well, I've run a couple marathons. I've run a
Oh,
couple
marathon.
marathons.
Okay,
Can't
okay,
swim very well.
right. But oh, okay, but yeah. So and we did, I think, like 8 takes or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
probably.
but just really, again, the stamina, unbelievable to watch you do that, and just every time, just delivering, just really amazing.
Mm. Yeah, I thank you for saying that. I appreciate that so much. Yeah, that was an interesting, I mean, I feel like it was, I spent a lot of we shot that scene right at the beginning of
Yeah.
the shooting schedule. It was really close to the beginning, and it was in those first early days of shooting the movie. Kind of, I didn't say anything for like 3 days, I feel like, or something.
Hmm.
And I feel like in that moment there was just, you know, there was clearly so much. We've talked about how in a lot of ways this central sort of like toxic love relationship with the demon is so elemental to the lady and her struggle, and I think it's just one of those moments where, like, you know, you see her running away from him and you also see the desire to be with him, and all of those things were just part of the puzzle of like what was happening for her in that moment. And it was just fun to get to play with that just through physical, you know, body language.
And I wanted to talk about that final sequence when the lady's been picked up by a stranger in the car, and just that sequence of events, because it's such a beautiful shot and there's so much emotionally happening. And so starting with you, Giovanni, I wanted to just ask about how you worked with JT and really figuring out the framing, because there's so much intimacy in the camera work and the way that it just holds on Willa for those elongated moments of time. And it feels like
Hmm.
she's, when she sees herself in the reflection, it's like she's seeing herself so fully in that moment.
Mm.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, first of all, that was actually supposed to be a Luma plate, or so I put a bounce behind her, and the intention was to key that out to put a different background because that's all we could do. And then in the edit, they decided to keep it because again, it starts to feel more subjective and more like a dream for her. And then that last shot, I think that was truly out of one of the craziest productions I've ever experienced or been on. This was the craziest day out of that production. And it's just again a testament to Willa and her focus and discipline. But we had actually worked out wanting to do that, wanting to watch somebody die in real time on screen after this harrowing, incredible story and journey. And we actually sat right here and talked about it, like, oh, great, for as long as it took. And then it was a big fight with the studio and the director to do that. They didn't really get it or understand it. And I think just everybody jumped on board, and it was more or less kind of doing it under their noses. Like we did it sort of despite another mandate. Um, and then yeah, I mean, I don't know, I won't take it, but I mean, I'm sure Willa can speak to what it was like shooting that.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this before. But it's one of those like weird things where it's like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things I've done as an actor that I've never done in real life. I've never killed anyone, just to
Right.
start with that.
Yeah.
But dying on camera is always a strange thing. And it's often kind of even stranger because usually when you die on camera, you're dying like really fast, which,
Yeah.
as we all know, is not usually how it happens. And so in some ways it was kind of nice to have like a longer period of time to really explore that. Because also I think that as much as it is a death scene, it's also a scene of reckoning. Like she has had this massive realization that's happened to her in the immediate moment before the woman shoots her. And it is as much a death as it is this sort of inventory of her life and where she's ended up and who this woman is to her. And I think that there's so much in that moment for the lady of looking at this person who in some ways has actually kind of like saved her life while killing her by killing her. And we shot this scene. It was the last, I'm pretty sure it was the last thing that we shot. We only did it twice, and the second time we did it was the last thing I shot as the lady, and it was it was just a fitting way to wrap production, and it felt very real in that way.
Well, it's a really, really wonderful film. There's so much creativity in it. It looks absolutely stunning, and your performance is amazing. So congratulations to both of you, and thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. It was great to talk to you.
I know, so fun.
Yeah.